Patty Christensen, hand CRPS lady. I'm figuring out how to do this. There's just no easy way. So I'm going to be, when you see me looking like, it's because I'm going to read. We're dealing with some family stuff. So I wanted to pull out. You got to love being a Southerner because you're just proud of your heritage, no what matter what it is. And so these are both on my maternal line, but going the opposite directions. So this is my maternal line going up that direction. Okay, and this is actually from the official book on the history of Buckingham County, Virginia. Okay, here we go. It's called The Life of Vera Elder Crews. This would be my at least one great grandmother. And it says from 1877 to 1942. Vera Elder Crews and Richard Crews of Buckingham Courthouse 40 years ago. She was a girl of 18 and Dick was a bit over 20. So figure out what time frame this is being written in. Vera's parents were poor farmers, but the children, especially the girls, were high-minded. While they dressed in the most ordinary style, they were desirous to own the more expensive clothes they saw worn by the more successful neighbors. The slogan, "Keeping Up with the Joneses," was very much in keeping with their desires, especially Vera's. "If I just had enough money to dress in silks and satins and splurge along with the high-ups, I'll never be satisfied until I do." Vera had to quit school because of her father's finances were not sufficient to send her to another school. Vera thought if only she could go to the factory to work, she could get some pretty clothes. But this dream had to perish because the factory was too far away. Vera was a beautiful girl and was very popular, was of a good family, and she was getting taken by her friends to the old barn dances where the old Virginia reel was danced until the wee hours of the morning. The old fiddle and banjo were played and numbers called, and the old folks patted their feet in time with the music, often joining in for a set or changing partners. Vera soon found herself watching Dick, a fine-dressed young man with fine features. Dick's father was a well-to-do farmer of Buckingham, and she felt him gaze upon her. How she longed for those pretty clothes. But Dick wasn't looking too much at her clothes. He thought they were pretty enough, even if they weren't made of silk, and thought Vera was just about the prettiest girl he had ever seen. When Dick asked her to dance, Vera obliged, and he reached for her hand, and the music started, and they danced away, only to change partners all too soon. Dick started coming over to Vera's. When she was 18, they were married. The wedding was a simple one. Then Dick rented a farm and continued farming, and after his work on the farm was done, he would cut timber. Dick earned the title of champion woodcutter along with his boyhood friend Maurice Garrett. Dick liked to raise cattle and sheep. They brought him a nice income, and after a few years, he says, "Vera, we've been saving our money for 10 years, and the old Christian farm is up for sale. What do you say? Let's go buy it." So now he had a farm of his own, and the largest children were getting ready to help him. Otis was the oldest son and was 9 years old. Russell was 2 years younger. Maisie, that's my maternal grandmother, the sister, was 4, and the baby Grace. The old Christian place had been a tract of land of 238 acres, only 3 miles from the courthouse, and the big brick house, which, by the way, I've been to, was with 6 large spacious rooms and wide hall, 3 stories plastered throughout. The kitchen, which, by the way, was a separate building, had concrete flooring. It was built in 1898, over 100 years ago, by Mr. Christian, and had only been sold twice. Dick was the 3rd owner. The old house is haunted, so it was always difficult to keep tenants. The farm was a good one with large pastures, streams, and a nice house. But when the tenants began to hear the large rocking chairs rocking and the smalling chairs turned over, the big heavy doors opened by themselves after they had been closed, and a heavy door placed across. When they would go to see who was tearing the furniture up, only to find the doors closed and everything was in place. As soon as they could get the crops off, the house was empty, with another owner looking for family to rent the place and live there. Dick and Vera were brave and were not given to superstitions, and they had a good farm and were making a good living, and the haunts didn't run them away. My ancestors were the original, we ain't afraid of no ghosts. Anyway, they lived there for 40 years, reared 10 children, sent them to grammar school, and some of the children were far away working with others married. As soon as the children grew to be grown boys and girls, the boys began to drink, and the girls began to smoke and drink and going out with the wild crowd. The neighbors began to talk of their wild doings, and soon they began to be left out of the social circle. Dick worked hard, saved money, and earned a high place in his community. He and Vera were members of the church and enjoyed the fellowship of other members. So when the boys started to live wild lives, and then even his own girls, it was more than Dick's pride could stand. To be stubbed by his neighbors hurt his feeling, much more his pride. When his wife could no longer mingle with the leading circle, she drifted down with the girls. Vera just had to have friends, cost what that would. She loved crowds, dancing, music, traveling, and often spending the week in the city with her daughters where they worked. All this was hurting Dick worse and worse. Sorry, the person who wrote this was not the most literal person, so I'm trying to add in and so it'll make sense and be grammatically correct. Time drifted on, and Dick was not getting anywhere. He lost interest in his farm, his cattle, and at last his home. He at last, too, began to drink and throw his money to the four winds. His farm was going down, money was not coming in, and he was discouraged by his family. Vera seemed to be interested in a good time and spent too much money away. Dick stayed at home with the children. They were all grown, but they drifted down and down. The community looked down on the family. They needed somebody to help them. The neighbors said, "You go. Maybe you could go do some good." But the committee of the church wrote them letters asking them to please come back to church, but visiting them was out of the question. Some of the boys were old bachelors with a life spent mostly by reckless living and feeling the lost opportunities. We'd love, and this in quote, "We'd love for you to come back and spend some time hold up some prayer meetings sometime. We need to help." And so then when somebody came to the house, Dick replied, "We need help. We have a big living room here, a piano and everything. Why won't you come? Just let us know. We'll invite in some friends. We'd love to have you come." But now Dick is dead. He got a sore on his ankle, and it grew worse. It went into blood poison, and he was rushed to the hospital. He was operated on twice, but the limb was taken off in an effort to save his life. But after all that, he passed on. He was buried in the family cemetery. It's called the Christian Cemetery. That's the name, Christian Cemetery. The farm was mortgaged to pay his hospital and funeral expenses. Vera says, "We can't make a living here anymore. I want to sell and move to the city," which I think was Charlottesville. But the boys said never. "We liked it, and I like farming, and we will get mortgage paid sometime." Otis, the old bachelor, said, "I'm going to get me a wife and live here for the rest of my life." Vera was now 62. She wears her hair in a long bob, covering most of her shoulder. Her features are slim and medium height. She wears black even though Dick has been dead for 8 years. She puts on a little rouge and a lot of powder. Her dresses are short and made in style. If she's viewed from the back, she will be taken for a much younger woman. But alas, her face betrays her age, though she is all smiles and she says she is a merry widow. And that's where it ends.